It began with a sentence so absurd it felt like a slap. "My job isn't to drive your kid around. I'm not a chauffeur." Those words rang in my ears while rain battered the windows of my office. My daughter Jessica was sitting outside her school at that very moment, soaked, fever burning through her small body, skin clammy, lips trembling. 104 degrees. She had been there for hours, waiting, alone, and I had done this. I didn't argue, didn't beg. I just let the silence hang between us as my mother's voice dripped with disdain, then cut off altogether with a hollow click. When the line went dead, something inside me fractured. Not grief, not disappointment, but a furious clarity that burned ice cold at first, then spread until my hands shook against the steering wheel. I'd been in the middle of leading a meeting that had taken weeks to prepare for when the school nurse called. Her tone was steady, but underneath it lay urgency, a tremor she tried to hide. "Jessica's been vomiting again. The fever hasn't dropped. It's at 104, we can't reach anyone else. She's waiting outside and it's pouring." I remember the fluorescent lights of the conference room glaring down, the faces of my colleagues frozen on the screen, words evaporating from my throat. As soon as I ended the call, I dialed my mother. 10 minutes from the school. Retired. Nothing on her schedule but idle afternoons. She picked up like it was any ordinary Tuesday. When I asked her to get Jessica, she laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound that stung more than a refusal. Then that sentence, that damned sentence, "I'm not a chauffeur." She went on, said she wasn't about to drop everything just because a child was a little under the weather, that I had chosen to have Jessica, not her, that she'd done her time. Then she hung up. I stared at the phone, at my reflection in the black screen, and something twisted deep inside me. This wasn't the first time she had failed me, but it was the first time her selfishness had teeth, sharp enough to scar more than me. Jessica had no one else nearby, no neighbour, no backup, only me. I ran for my car. The drive stretched into a blur of horns and headlights, my voice hoarse from shouting at red lights, knuckles aching from gripping the wheel too tightly. 1 hour, 12 minutes. That's how long it took to get to her. By then, the rain was heavier, drumming against the hood like war drums. She was still there, sitting on a stone bench, hair plastered to her forehead, soaked through, shivering so violently her small shoulders shook. Her backpack lay open at her side, and she was curled around it, shielding her books with her fevered body. My heart broke and hardened all at once. I lifted her into the car. She didn't speak, didn't even whimper. Her limbs were limp against me, her skin frighteningly hot, her breath shallow. I drove straight to the hospital. The emergency ward lights felt merciless, sterile. Nurses swarmed, voices curt and urgent. The thermometer beeped, 104.6. A doctor muttered about dehydration, tubes, oxygen, fluids. I was asked when she'd last kept anything down. I didn't know. My throat sealed shut as I stared at the monitor, watching jagged lines that dictated her fragile rhythm. That night, I sat in the hospital room, watching my child sleep under wires and tubes, and through it all, echoing, relentless, was my mother's voice. "I'm not a chauffeur." By dawn, exhaustion had hardened into resolve. At 6 a.m., I opened my laptop. One by one, I severed every lifeline they leaned on, the rent assistance, the grocery deliveries, the insurance premiums I'd covered for 2 years. No message, no explanation. Let them feel what Jessica had felt, alone, forgotten, shivering in the rain. The silence was intoxicating. 3 days passed without a word. Not a call, not a text. Jessica's fever finally broke, but her lungs still rattled, and she needed oxygen. I stayed by her side, dozing on the fold-out chair, eating stale crackers from a vending machine. The hospital room became my entire world, humming with machines, filled with the faint antiseptic sting of bleach. The first voicemail came while I slipped home to grab clothes and check on the cats. It was my father, casual, as if nothing had shifted in the world. He asked for gas money. He was planning a trip to the lake. I deleted it. That night, another message. This time, my mother. Short, sharp. Their card had been declined at the grocery store. She asked if I'd forgotten to send this month's transfer. I let the question rot in silence. By the third day, the confusion curdled into anger. My mother called twice, then sent a text with 6 question marks, followed by another that read, "Did you cancel something?" "Yes," I typed, "all of it." The calls multiplied, 5 by noon, 10 by evening. I silenced my phone and turned back to the muted cartoon flickering on the hospital TV while Jessica slept. The next day, they showed up at my apartment. I was still camped out in the hospital when the receptionist rang my cell. "2 people were pounding on your apartment door," she told me. "They left, eventually." Not long after, a voicemail landed. "We need to talk." "All right, you've proved your point, but this is getting serious. We can't make ends meet without that money. Why would you do this to your own family?" That word, family, nearly made me choke with bitter laughter. Jessica was improving, if only inch by inch. She asked about her grandmother once, voice thin as paper. I told her plainly, she wasn't coming. No excuses, no false comfort. Jessica nodded, turned back to her crayons. But for me, something snapped. The anger wasn't just simmering anymore, it calcified. I was finished. That night, my mother sent her last message with any pretense of calm. "If your goal was to wound us, congratulations. You've done it. I hope you're satisfied." The following morning, I checked the door camera. There they were again, red-faced, screaming at my apartment, as if the walls could care. My father lashed out, kicking a potted plant until the clay split. My mother shrieked into the doorbell lens, spit flying, eyes wild. They had no clue about the second camera tucked above the frame, capturing every second. I watched the footage twice, not in fear, out of fascination. So this is who they really were, when deprived of a single safety net. And still, they had no idea how close they stood to the edge. By day 5, the tone had shifted. My father left a voicemail muttering about the power bill overdue, lights about to go dark. My mother's texts flooded in, a storm of capital letters. She called me cruel, accused me of blowing things out of proportion. Then came the line that carved into me like a knife. "We never asked to be grandparents. That was your decision. If she can't handle a bit of rain, maybe she doesn't belong in school." I read it once, then again, a third time. My pulse thudded in my ears. Jessica had spent 4 nights tethered to machines, lungs rattling like broken glass, and still they minimized her suffering as weakness. I didn't answer. I opened my laptop. Years ago, when their credit was in ruins, I co-signed their lease to help them secure a roof. I'd been quietly covering the shortfall in rent ever since. That afternoon, I emailed the landlord. At month's end, my name would be off the lease. The payments would stop. I knew exactly how the panic would taste to them. At 2:13 a.m., my phone buzzed. My mother, her voice raw with fear, begged to explain, insisted it was all a misunderstanding, that they'd been upset, didn't mean the words they'd hurled. I let the message play through once, then erased it. An hour later, my father called. No apology, only venom. "If you let this eviction happen, that's it. We're finished. You'll regret this. Karma will come for you." I almost laughed at that. The next afternoon, they returned in person. This time they loitered in the hallway for nearly 2 hours, bickering so loudly the neighbour opened her door to complain. They didn't even notice. I watched from the hidden camera as their tempers devoured each other. Jessica was discharged the following day, still coughing, still fragile, but smiling again in her blanket cocoon on the couch. She asked why her grandparents hadn't called. "They're busy," I said, but I knew better. Their silence wasn't busyness. It was desperation fermenting, and people like them don't break gracefully. They turn on each other, clawing to survive. It began with a voicemail from my aunt, a woman absent from my life for years. She said my mother had phoned her sobbing, spinning tales about how I had cut them off, how they were on the brink of homelessness. She asked me to rise above, to be the bigger person. I didn't respond. Every time I looked at Jessica sipping water through a straw, curled weakly under her blankets, the fire inside me reignited. My mother had abandoned her in the rain. My father had stood by, arms crossed. And now I was expected to forgive? No. They had written their own ending. By the 7th day, their cupboards were bare. I knew because they used their last data to post online. The words seethed on my screen. I was vindictive, unstable, poisoning Jessica against them, destroying what was left of the family. And as I read their performance, I realized they were unraveling exactly as I'd known they would. It didn't take long for them to start turning on each other. That same day, an email from my landlord arrived in my inbox. My father had apparently tried to claim I'd promised to keep covering the rent, said he even had it in writing. He didn't. I forwarded every receipt, every thread of messages, every documented agreement. The truth cut through his lie like glass, and that's when the real panic set in. The following morning, he showed up at my office. Security stopped him before he got past the lobby, but he stood outside for 45 minutes, bellowing my name until his voice went raw. That afternoon came a cascade of texts from my mother, veering wildly between weepy apologies and venomous accusations. I was cruel. I was destroying the family. And then came the message that revealed her true hand. You win. This is what you wanted, isn't it? She never should have been born. None of this would have happened if you hadn't trapped yourself with that child. I stared at the words, bile rising in my throat. Then I took screenshots of every message, every voicemail, and saved them in a folder titled "In Case I Forget," because I didn't want to forget. I wanted the record, a permanent reminder of who they really were. Only a week earlier, they strutted around as though I depended on them. Now, they were squatting in their own apartment, stringing an extension cord into the hallway to siphon electricity, praying the neighbours wouldn't report them again. An eviction notice was circling. I didn't need to lift a finger. They were doing the work for me. But I wasn't prepared for the knock at my door 2 days later. 2 uniformed officers. Calm, polite, firm. My parents had filed a report, accusing me of withholding financial support I'd legally committed to, and worse, that Jessica had been endangered due to my neglect. The moment I heard that word, neglect, my pulse thundered in my ears. I invited the officers inside, sat them down, handed them everything, years of proof, the transfers, the bills I'd paid, the discharge papers from the hospital. And then, as if sealing their own coffin, I played the voicemail where my mother said Jessica should never have been born. By the end, both officers looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. One of them asked, almost gently, if I wanted to file for a restraining order. I didn't answer. I just asked them to leave. That night, I drove to their apartment, not to speak, not to scream, but to serve them. The paperwork was processed by morning. They were barred from coming near me or Jessica ever again. For a moment, I thought that was the end, but it wasn't. 2 nights later, a man in a black hoodie knocked on my door. I didn't recognize him at first. It was my father's cousin, someone I hadn't seen in a decade. His face was tight with shame. He told me he'd heard about everything, that my parents had been spinning tales, telling the family I'd stolen money, that I'd abused Jessica, that I'd left them to starve while I wasted cash on vacations and some imaginary man. I laughed. He didn't. Instead, he said he wasn't the only one they'd conned. For 6 months, my parents had been borrowing from relatives, pawning jewelry, even trying to refinance a car. Mine. He told me his own father had given them nearly $5,000 just weeks before, after they swore I'd abandoned them. And then came the detail that stopped me cold. 2 days before Jessica collapsed with fever, my parents received $800 from a distant relative's inheritance. They hadn't told anyone. They blew it at a casino. I stared at him. He muttered an apology and left. That same night, an envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address. Inside, a single line written in my mother's looping script. This is your fault. If we die, it's on you. I didn't hesitate. I struck a match and watched the paper curl to ash in the sink. By the weekend, the lights in their apartment went out for good. No power, no running water. Their calls dried up. No one wanted to help anymore, not even the cousin who had come to warn me. The family was finished with them. The final voicemail came days later. It wasn't words, not really. Just ragged breathing. Sobs pressed against the speaker. I listened to it in silence, Jessica's small hand curled in mine as she drifted to sleep in her own bed, her breathing steady at last. Karma hadn't just come knocking. It had kicked the door down. For 5 days, there was silence. Jessica was back on the living room floor, brushing her doll's tangled hair and asking me ordinary questions as though the storm had never touched her. I'd started to sleep again. I let myself believe it was over, that shame or exhaustion had finally broken them, that they'd vanished into whatever shadows had shaped them. I was wrong. It was a Sunday night when the lights flickered, then went black. At first, I thought it was a breaker, but when I stepped into the hallway, I froze. Through the glass of the building's main entrance, I saw them. My mother clutching a wrench. My father, bolt cutters gleaming in his hand. They hadn't just cut my power. They'd shut down the entire building, every apartment, every family in darkness because of them. The neighbour across the hall came out just in time to catch them fleeing. The police were there minutes later. I handed over the restraining order and played them the footage from the hallway cam. By the next day, my parents were in custody, but the spiral hadn't bottomed out yet. The very next morning, my phone rang. A lawyer. My parents had taken out a payday loan using forged documents, dragging my name into it as a co-signer. Worse, they'd used Jessica's social security number twice to apply for emergency aid. My daughter's identity. My blood ran cold. The money wasn't enormous, around $3,000, but the betrayal was vast. They hadn't just crossed a line, they'd scorched it. Something shifted in me then. The fury cooled into precision. I called every credit bureau, froze every account, filed identity theft reports, and sent copies of the restraining order along with the police documentation. Then, I made my final move. I pressed charges. 2 days later, a letter arrived. My father's handwriting, scrawled from county jail. 3 pages of half apologies and blame shifting. He said my mother orchestrated it all, that he never knew about Jessica's identity being stolen, that he loved her, that he was ashamed. At the bottom, a single desperate line. Please, don't let me rot here. You're still my daughter. I didn't answer. Instead, I packed a bag and took Jessica to a cabin upstate. No cell signal, no news, no echoes of chaos. Just us. She laughed at the sound of loons on the lake, clutched my hand as we sat by the fire, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. They hadn't broken me. They had destroyed themselves because they believed love was infinite, an account they could drain, a shield against consequence. but love has limits. Mine ended the night they left my daughter, shivering in the rain, waiting for help that never came. And she will never wait again. Not for them, not for anyone. For a while after the court hearings, after the restraining order was locked in place, after I told the DA I wasn't interested in compromise, only accountability, the world went still. Too still, like the pause after thunder. Jessica healed faster than I did. She was back at school, back to her smile. I stopped checking the cameras every night. I stopped expecting footsteps outside my door. Until last Friday. A knock at the door. Not them, but not a stranger either. Her name was Sandra. She said she worked with a church outreach program and had been asked to visit me on behalf of my parents. My pulse stilled as she spoke. They were living in a transitional shelter now, she said. My mother placed on suicide watch. My father diagnosed with severe liver damage. No car, no money, no allies, only the hollow weight of their consequences. She held out a sealed envelope. They asked me to deliver this. They said you wouldn't answer calls or letters. She hesitated, eyes soft. I'm not taking sides. I just thought maybe this could help you heal. I took it, closed the door. The envelope sat on my counter for 2 days before I broke the seal. Inside was a folded photograph. Me holding Jessica the day she was born, and a note in my mother's looping script. We failed you. We failed her. If we could trade places, we would. But we can't. If this is the last thing you ever hear from us, let it be this. We were wrong, and you were right about everything. I didn't cry. I didn't feel relief. What washed over me was a peculiar stillness, the kind that settles after a storm has passed, not because danger is gone, but because something new is beginning. I don't know yet if I'll ever see them again. Maybe I will, maybe I won't, but the choice is mine now. The ending belongs to me and Jessica, and we're only just beginning.